And my name's Steve Lindley. I'm in Wyoming. We're looking forward to hearing from you and wish you well, and we'll have a conversation here shortly.
Oh,
You're muted.
We take turns on who's going to forget to unmute. It's my turn. But hello, South Dakota. My name is Tim Murphy. I work at the University of Chicago, overseeing the Master of Liberal Arts program there. And we run some continuing education programs for social studies teachers. We're all looking very much forward to our conversation.
Would you introduce yourselves and your teacher, please?
My name is Madigan Schmitz.
I'm Tyler Huber.
I'm Diane Glassford.
I'm Noah Friedrich, and this is our teacher, Mr. Gainey.
All right, excellent. All right, let's rock and roll. The question for you today is, the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? And lastly, to what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? You may begin when ready.
The American Revolutionary War was justified by the colonists using certain revolutionary principles suggested by political thinkers throughout history. Revolution comes from the Latin meaning a turn around or a complete turn. John Locke believed that the role of the government was to protect its citizens' life, liberty, and property. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson writes that, quote, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government, laying its foundations on such principles, end quote. As outlined in the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers believed that King George had violated all of what they considered to be revolutionary principles, many of which mentioned are in the particulars. Especially rule of law was of utmost importance to Jefferson, but also consent of the governed, trial by jury, and the freedom of trade and commerce was considered necessities by the founders. Since using peaceful forms of revolution, such as the boycotts on the Townshend and Stamp Acts, and destructive ones like the Boston Tea Party failed to push the king and parliament to accept these principles, American colonists proceeded to go to war to ensure their turning around.
The making of the Constitution was heavily influenced by revolutionary principles at the time, such as popular sovereignty, limited power of the federal government, and checks and balances. Popular sovereignty is expressed in Article 5 of the Constitution, which ensures that amendments can only be passed by a majority vote. It's also expressed in Article 7 of the Constitution by requiring that 9 states approve any proposed framework before it becomes the supreme law of the land. The idea of limited government can be found in both 9th and 10th Amendment of the Constitution. The 9th Amendment states that the rights of the people do not have to be written in the Constitution to apply. The 10th Amendment represents the idea of limited government by stating that powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The idea of having checks and balances in the government is laid out in Article 1, where it describes the design of the legislative branch. Revolutionary principles molded the mindset of the framers and can be seen throughout the Constitution.
The principle of consent fuels the legitimacy of the government and is the idea that the majority of people understand that they are better off under government jurisdiction rather than on their own. This ensures the paradigm that the government's decisions are only morally correct under the condition that those being governed consent. The principle of consent is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence as consent of the governed and is an essential ideal for today's working government. However, the principle of consent can create issues when amending the Constitution based on who can vote on the matter. At the time of the American Revolution, the only people that could vote were white men who owned land. Until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, African American men were not allowed to vote, and until the 19th Amendment in 1920, women were unable to vote as well. This was an issue because the changes that are being made to the Constitution were voted on by a fraction of the people that this document governs over, which is contrary to the principle of consent.
The idea of revolutionary principles isn't exclusive to the American Revolution. These are fluid principles that change based on what the people are fighting for. In the past year alone, we have seen people fighting for social change in many different areas. The fight for these rights in any form doesn't have to incite war or violence in order to be considered revolutionary. This past summer, people took to the streets to fight for racial equality and to protest against police brutality. However, this fight is not a new one. While the trajectory of the goal may change over time, the main goal has remained the same.
People inherently wish to be treated equally. This applies in any circumstance, whether the issue stems from the taxes you pay or the color of your skin. Many other human rights advocates face this same issue in their respective fights as well. For centuries, people have gone out of their way to stand up for what they believe in, and these groups will continue to fight until they receive the representation and protections they deserve. These will continue to evolve and change as presidential administrations and representatives ebb and flow, but people will continue to fight for what they feel is essential. In the 1770s, we fought for freedom from Britain, and in the 2020s, we're fighting for freedom of oppression, and that is what makes these principles truly revolutionary. We are now ready to take your questions.
So let's jump right into it and bring it to our contemporary times. So we see across our country a number of states that are contemplating and introducing bills that are going to alter the electoral process, right? Some people are arguing it's in the name of voter security, election security. Others are arguing that it's voter suppression. So share with us some of your thoughts. What's going on in terms of this movement, and what does the Constitution suggest should or will happen?
So I assume that, well, at least what came to my mind first is particularly Georgia's latest law, in regards to voter, which has been widely criticized as being suppression. However, there are multiple states that have stricter laws than Georgia actually has currently, including New York and Wyoming. And as far as whether or not it's actually oppressive, most of what the law entitles is that you have to have identification. And identification is something that the vast majority of Americans have. And you have to have an identification to do most basic tasks, such as get a job, drive a car, or obtain a driver's license more specifically. So I would definitely argue against the fact that it would be considered suppression of voters.
I would say that it's at this point in time, I would say it's okay to change the electoral process, just because when it was first created, most Americans couldn't read at the time. So I think as education grew and as more voters became educated, I think it'd be adequate to change the electoral process.
Well, let's look at the Constitution. We'll dig into that. So let's say, for example, that there is a group in Georgia or another state that does have a legitimate claim that the actions are excessive and truly are resulting in the disenfranchisement of some particular group in their state. What constitutional remedies or solutions might we look to?
Historically, when it comes to voting, specifically in the federal government, basically it always has to be a constitutional amendment. The right for African American men to vote came about from a constitutional amendment, and the right for women to vote came about via a constitutional amendment. And the weight that an amendment carries in relation to all the other laws that can be passed by the federal government is so much greater that it ensures that what the amendment is calling for gets done.
In addition to that, I think that the best way to remedy the situation is to have a unified electoral process where all states vote in the same way.
Thank you.
I'll go just a slightly different direction. You think that the Bill of Rights, either in part or in full, added to or promoted revolutionary principles or not? And if so, why or why not?
I personally feel that the Bill of Rights is kind of the framework for revolutionary principles, because they're able to be amended and changed based on what the citizens of our country want at that particular time. So I honestly think that it's kind of the exigence for getting people to fight for what they want and stand up for what they believe in.
I agree with Madigan in that revolutionary principles aren't permanent. They change with the times and they change with the generations.
And going off of both of their comments, in particular, the first amendment, the freedom of speech, petition, and assembly, specifically allows people to have the ability to call for change or revolution. And the 9th and 10th ensure that enumerated rights are allowed, make sure that the citizens are aware of the fact that laws or supposed rights can expand and contract.
Thank you.
let me follow up on this idea that came up a few times in your opening statement of popular sovereignty and consent of the people. Is there an inherent danger in popular sovereignty if, for example, the people are misinformed or misled? How can then we channel the will of those people into effective government if there's a potential of being misled or misinformed?
Well, both misinformation and misleading have led to historical downfalls. Two examples that came to my mind first when you brought up the misleading is, for example, the Roman Republic, which led to the collapse due to popular sovereignty and the lack of people being aware of the intentions of Caesar. They were simply more interested in his will than they were in the Senate. And then again, we can see people being misinformed by somebody that they were passionate about. They were more interested in a person than they were in upholding laws that resulted in the January 6th storming of the Capitol.
I think misinformation in today's day and age is something to be very cautious of, given how social media, how many minds it's changed, how many people it's convinced based off of false rumors, lies, because it just it can just really lead to some bad actions by people, or even them like voting for somebody that has completely different viewpoints than they thought of.
I agree. I think we should look to our political leaders for guidance in those situations. I don't think the people running our country should be promoting, not necessarily misinformation, but just should be trying their best to have cohesiveness in what they're trying to get across.
I think the best way to avoid misinformation is to strengthen our public education and help kids become more informed when they're young on how everything works in order to be more educated voters.
I want to go back to something you said in your prepared response. You referenced both the 9th and 10th Amendments as ways of limiting oppressive government, right, coming out of the revolution. Tell me more about how the 10th Amendment is a component of limited government, and could it be misused? What do you think about the 10th Amendment? Tell me a little bit more just to get us started.
I guess the enumerated powers given to the states, I guess how I would interpret that as being possible to lead to corruption would be the states using as an argument against federal overreach and in turn result in poor decision making inside of the states instead. That would be my best interpretation, given the attempt of both of the 9th and 10th Amendment being to increase the rights of the people in the states specifically.
Looks like there's 3 seconds left, so we'll try not to get another question in there.
Nicely
Okay,
done.
time.
Okay. Thank you all. Well done. Nicely done. And hesitations are fine. Nothing to be worried about at all. Okay, so if my colleagues don't mind, I'll just get going. Thank you for the evidence of your hard work over the last year. Clearly, you put your work in, you put the hours in. We commend you for that. It's great to be here. I actually liked the fact that you brought up the 9th and 10th Amendment. That's why I came back to it at the end, because it was a unique way of articulating some of those principles that the founders were playing around with. And what you want to always consider, and you're beginning to show that, is that tension that exists, right? There's a conflict. There's a conflict between individual rights and classical Republican common good. There's a conflict between being a state citizen and a citizen of the nation. And those conflicts and tensions exist today, and they will exist throughout your entire lives. And you're going to have to grapple with those. And I feel very good that you'll be able to do that. You're showing some strong thinking skills. What I also want you to think about is, what's the structure of the Constitution, right? How is that relationship between states and the federal government sort of managed? Yeah, we've got the 10th Amendment, the reserved powers, and I really appreciate that you didn't say states' rights, because people have rights, states have powers. but also the 14th Amendment, right? And the Supremacy Clause. And there's a tension there, right? There's this, what's truly supreme? When does the federal government, national government win the day? And when do we defer to states? And I just appreciate the fact that you're willing to think about those things. And I wish you well moving forward. Thank you.
Yes, and again, congratulations for making it to nationals. That's a significant accomplishment, and all of your hard work as a parent. And a thank you as well to your teacher and those that have helped you get to this point, as well as all the time you individually have put in and collectively. You seem to have a good grasp of the broad issues at hand, and you complemented one another. You supported each other with facts. You had some and critical thinking. You were able to easily reference, for example, on Mr. Fox's question around some of the voting adjustments, I guess you would call them, going on now, and reference George's situation as a well-known one. So anyway, you did quite nicely with the essay and your response to it, and you'll do good things moving forward, and we wish you well. Thank you.
And I would just add a couple things. First is that I think as a group, I think you did well, and as was mentioned, complimenting each other and picking up on each other's trains of thought. So I think that that was effective. I think that also you didn't just list off like sections of the Constitution or amendments and just assume that like it's really easy to answer these questions if you just say, oh, it's probably in Article 3, and well, it probably is in Article 3, but you were popular sovereignty, you said, was Article 5 and Article 7, and then on a handful of your constitutional references, you didn't just list it, but you explained how it related to your point, which shows that you guys aren't just memorizing stuff and spewing it out, but like you understand what it means and you understand how it relates to our question, which I think is very effective. I would encourage you guys going forward to always, have your argument, and then think about the other side, and then bring it up, even if it's to bring it up and sort of shoot it down, but just sort of a fuller picture kind of thing. But otherwise, and this sort of goes on to the constitutional application portion. But you had a good breadth of examples that were brought up in support of things. In answer to my question, Rome was brought up, and the people being misled to Caesar, which is something I would never have answered my own question that way. So that depth of knowledge is very good. But it also, in the beginning, you brought it to present day. These revolutionary principles are fluid, I think was said, and they were fighting for liberty back then, and now we're fighting against oppression today. And sort of seeing that whole picture, bookending it from past and present, is sort of the reason why we study this stuff. Helps us to better understand today. And that was very evident in your presentation. So I commend you for all those things.